Hi everyone. So recently Marie and I did a video. We were sitting over there in front of the library and we were talking about books, right? I was talking kind of casually about books and she had 4 specific ones that she referenced. We did that Renaissance fair, right? We were selling my book, this, Crown and the Cage God. And while I was peeing in the like medieval porta potties, Marie was selling my book by comparing it to 4 others. One of them is David Sedaris, not any individual book, but the structure of it of sort of observation about like human weakness in a like a daily diary kind of format. Darwin was another one. This is Voyage of the Beagle, and the emphasis of biology and discovery in a sort of poetic. So the prose gets a little bit dandelion-y. And then Lord of the Rings, obviously, she referenced, and then Name of the Wind. The rest of the Rothfuss works are on the fantasy shelf. So those are Marie's 4. But at the end of that video, I said, you know what, I'm going to come up with 4 books of my own, and I'm going to treat this a little bit differently, where those are, if you've read these books, you have some idea what to expect when you open up my covers and start reading through my chapters. You have some idea of what might be familiar. But this is going to be influences. My 4 books today will just be, and I talked about some of this stuff. I'm going to talk about totally different books today that I didn't talk about last time, but some influences I got into last time. Kurt Vonnegut, like Breakfast of Champions. You know, when I started writing my daily journal, my Dear Diary journal that I kept for years and years and years, Breakfast of Champions was a book I had sort of discovered. My brother introduced me to it right at that time, and that's where I learned about the elasticity of sentence structure. You know, it's like a whole sentence might be this colon, and then it has like a picture, like a drawing of a cat's colon or something. But you know, because like keeping that journal was, I took a lot of university courses in my life, and all of them combined didn't teach me as much as keeping that journal. And so there are some books at the onset of my daily diaries that were really influential. But I talked about that last time. I'm going to talk about all new things, and actually I have a honorable mention this week too. So I have 4 books and an honorable mention, which is a collection. Okay, so the Time Life books. Okay, so like these and this and this. Most of these I bought at bookstores, at local bookstores. And when I started writing my fantasy book, I was really reading these a lot to understand. If you get through this whole collection, like what's this one? Legends of Valor. If you get through this whole collection, I'm not really sure where to put these, you will have, I mean, like a Bachelor of Arts in, I don't know, English literature, you know, like fantasy literature or something like that. At least a minor, if not a major, in this. I mean, because it expands everything from, here's the Fall of Camelot. So this is like Arthurian legend to, this one is whatever, magical beasts, night creatures, to like, I don't know, like fairy tales and ghost stories and origin stories. So Norse mythology, tons of like Norse mythology, but like cultural origin stories. It's like the Book of Christmas too, dwarfs, fairies and elves. The Book of Beginnings, I think that's one of a bunch of origin stories, you know, wizard. So this huge collection of these things, again, when I started keeping, or not keeping my journal, when I started writing my fantasy story, surveying the background of lore and understanding the breadth of these stories, I was reading those. But that's my honorable mention. Let's get to the like actual top 4. My 4, like number 4, is a big like if you're a musician and you're referencing your influences, you have to say the Beatles. And here I have to say The Great Gatsby. I have Scott Fitzgerald, right? But this one, I've probably read this 8 or 9 times, maybe something like this. Every few years I reread it. Do you guys have, like in your books, do you keep, I have things that are just, half of my life, the paperwork, the receipts of my life are tucked between the pages. This is my acceptance letter to University of Connecticut, where I did my PhD. So that changed my life. But I'll just tucking in randomly. So whenever anybody reads my book, they always say like, Rourke is the most interesting character. Why is he not the protagonist? You should have made Rourke the narrator of this story. He's a protagonist, but why isn't he the narrator? And it seemed like Nick Carraway is the narrator. Gatsby is the interesting one. Gatsby is the mysterious, interesting creature, and that mystery would erode if he were the narrator. And so you need a relationship. You need a dear friendship between those two characters to preserve the mystery and tell the story. And so my narrator, the one who's writing these daily diary entries, is not Gatsby, right? It's not Rourke. He's just dear friends, old dear friends with Rourke. But beyond that, I mean, this one has a big plot, but Fitzgerald's like early work, Beautiful and the Damned, the sentences, it's criticism to call it prose, the way he handles his sentences. I mean, nothing really happens, in terms of the plot. Like Anthony Patch does nothing, is really the plot. But such beautiful, I have this one marked. I think this is one of my favorite scenes here. I would have to find it. It's the thing about the sunlight kind of gilding things and moving. As soon as you grab it, the sun has moved on. I don't want to find it. But that's what's marked there. And then my favorite Fitzgerald, maybe Gatsby is my favorite, but This Side of Paradise, I mean, he was like a kid when he wrote it. And again, like nothing, like Amory Blaine does nothing is really the plot. But, it's the observations and the way he writes this stuff. Ticket to a Ballet. I don't have my favorite scene marked. The one about eating the plate of candy. If you know what I'm talking about, there's a scene about sentimentalists, they didn't want the plate of candy restored. They just want the pleasure of eating it all over again. But the observations that he made, even as a kid, and his use of language, but Fitzgerald would be one of my main influences. And in the structure of my book, how Gatsby, right, Gatsby isn't based on, or Rourke rather, isn't based on Gatsby. So that's my number 4. My number 3 is, we're getting into some slightly, I don't know where I put it. We're getting into some very slightly, this isn't obscure. Everyone knows what this is. But if you were to ask people, fantasy writers, what their list of influences are, I don't think too many of them would. This is like off the beaten path, right, as the clichéists would say. Or if you're Emerson, if you were pseudo-epigraphical Emerson, as in not really Emerson, you'd say, like, what is that quotation everyone describes to him? Don't, follow the path that's already there, like, find some new trail and leave a trail behind. It's something like that. I phrased it really badly, and Emerson never actually said it. But the reason I bring that up is it's nothing on that side. Emerson. So Marie and I will go up to Oregon, I don't know, a couple times a year and spend a couple of weeks with my family at their house. And before I ever met Marie, in one of these extended stays at my parents' house, they had this huge walnut tree in their yard. You can see the walnut tree in one of the videos where I'm reading my own book. There's this massive tree behind me. That's in my parents' yard. And it must have been like a July or something, I just walked laps around that tree and read all of Emerson and all of that book. His poetry and how he handles nature. He sort of makes nature sacred by the use of words. So what letters get capitalized, and like time with the capital T. But the way he honors and sort of reveres nature has been preserved. It influenced me and has been preserved in my own writing. On the cover of my book is a tree. Now the tree is there for a reason. It's not just a tree for tree's sake. There's a lot of sort of Easter eggs buried in it that reveal the story to come. But that is my number 3. That's my number 3. My number 2, number 2, we're getting even more obscure now. I feel like I'm probably the only person in the last 50 years who's read this. And I'll hold it up like this. So when I was between master's and PhD, I didn't know what I was doing. I had sold this website for like $7,000, and then like $7,700, but $700 was like the middleman fee, and I was just living off of that, and I didn't know what I was doing with my life, and I ended up moving in with Julie Abendroth, who was my undergraduate mentor, advisor. And this sounds weird. It wasn't weird. It was platonic in the most literal sense. It sounds like she was Plato mentoring. That would make me Aristotle in this case. She was Plato and she was mentoring me. And so it was just this advising, this mentorship role that continued. And it was throughout this summer. And we would take these little trips, and we went out to Powell's, the bookstore in Oregon, on one of these trips. And at the time I had Tchaikovsky in my car had a cassette deck, and I had Swan Lake in there, and I was always listening to it. And so I saw this book, Beloved Friend, right? It's the letters, it's the correspondence between Tchaikovsky and Nadia von Meck. And it's like if this were Name of the Wind, where musicians have patrons. If you play the lute, you have a patron, and you wear the patron's colors. And Nadia von Meck was Tchaikovsky's patron, and I just loved his music. I'm like, oh, this will be fascinating. And so I went home to Julie's house. I started reading it, and his words were better than his notes. I mean, Tchaikovsky could really write some amazing notes, but he could write even better words. And these letters, and he was just back and forth, and one side of these letters is a stable person, and the other side, Tchaikovsky's letters, are filled with anxiety and like pettiness and tension. And it's just his day-to-day observations and trivialities, really, that he's writing about. But in the background, this is Tchaikovsky. I mean, this is one of the musical greats in the human species. And so there's this background story of how this legend, came to be, told in sort of daily letters that are just filled with tension and anxiety and pettiness. And that structure was preserved in my book, where the narrator is just writing these daily, it's not back and forthing, right? It's just forthing, the protagonist just writing in one direction. But the journal entries, the sort of letters or journal entries, are day to day. There's a little bit of pettiness, there's anxiety, and it's just trivialities. But what's happening in the background, as those little day-to-day occurrences and observations are setting up, a much larger story is being hinted at all the time through a small voice. So that's the most obscure one. The last one, my last influence, I always do this. I divide it up into two. And so throughout the book, you'll notice, are there 5 or are there 6? It tends to be a theme. Like you said, there was 5, and it seems like maybe there are 6. Is this theme of whenever there's numbers presented in the book. And so I'm doing that today too. And it's my 2 favorite books of all time. The first one, it's Oscar Wilde, right? Picture of Dorian Gray. His other than like Canterbury Ghosts and stuff, this is like really only his fantasy work. But this is just the observations he makes, the wit. Even if a lot of the wit, I just like, it's actually not really factually. I don't think that's quite philosophically or factually true, but it's so clever, and just the social observations, and the plot is just sort of a coat hanger on which he hangs all of these amazing insights and the phrasing of them. And so when I started writing my fantasy book, that was really, I discovered Oscar Wilde shortly before, and I was so passionate about reading every word he ever wrote. I mean, the rest of his works are all over the house. And then my other favorite book of all time, let's just call it a tie, I don't know, Princess Bride. This is my VHS and the book that I have. And I don't really need to say anything. Everyone knows this book. Everyone knows how amazing it is. Back when the internet was like brand new, and it was just like a big phone book, the internet. And then there's some websites with pictures of people's dogs that take 5 minutes to load. And I would call bulletin board systems, like that stuff, to play Legend of the Red Dragon, text-based like role-playing games. There was a website that I found all about Princess Bride, and I downloaded the movie script and printed it out on my like dot matrix printer or whatever. And I memorized that thing. So we could take a car trip, we're driving a family trip down to California, up in Oregon. And I could just go through line by line. I could do the entire movie in my head. And that's how important it was. And then eventually, not that much later, I discovered the book, and the book was somehow even better than that. Life-changing, character-defining. I would say that and Dragon Quest were really what made all the seeds of what became Courtney, the fantasy writer. But that's it. That's my list of major influences. And I hope you have a list of books, a library full of books that taught you how to think and how to reason, and sort of defined you and made you a better person and a clearer thinker, more ethical, taught you empathy and sort of strengthened your compassion, and fill in the blank. I hope your library did that to you too. So, all right, I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.